I'm Richard Harris, and welcome to Real Risk, the podcast that talks to people who put themselves in harm's way. You know the type. Big wave surfers, professional soldiers, base jumpers. I'll get inside the heads of men and women who seem fearless or even reckless. They might seem crazy to us, but most are far from it. We'll be talking about putting your life on the line for something important. We're talking about real risk. Episode 10 of the Real Risk podcast. I have to be honest, I had no idea how this would go, and to get this far is actually really exciting for me. It feels like some kind of celebration's in order, and by the time this episode hits the airwaves, Real Risk should have ticked over about 5,000 downloads. What's really rewarding for me is to hear from people who tell me that they're really enjoying the stories that my amazing guests are telling. Every one of those guests are extraordinary people, and it's a privilege to chat with them. The biggest danger for me is that I now want to sail a boat around the world, climb Mount Everest and, I still don't want to go base jumping, Sean. But I hope you're getting the same grandiose ideas as I am. In the words of Monty Python, now for something completely different. Perhaps the most amazing aspect or side effect of becoming the Joint Australian of the Year in 2019 has been the opportunity to meet some extraordinary people. Some of them have been celebrities, and I have to say I've been a bit intimidated by them initially. But once you get chatting with them, it turns out they're usually pretty humble, generous and endearing people. And a few of them have even become my friends. One such guy is Australian comedian Peter Helliar. Most Aussies will know Peter from his nightly appearance on The Project, but he's so much more than that show. He's a writer for screen and of books, he's a veteran live performer, an actor and of course a father and a husband. But most of all, he's just a bloody nice bloke. But how does this fit in with a podcast about risk? Well, I wanted to change things down a gear for this episode and give everyone's nerves a break from all the near-death experiences that we've been chatting about on the show, but still talk about something that frightens most of us more than the thought of dying. And that is public speaking and being a stand-up comedian. It's a pleasure to welcome Peter Helliar. Peter Helliar, thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations on everything.
Everything. Well, thank you, Harry. Great to be chatting with you. Congratulations on the podcast. Thank you. It's just good to be having a chat with you.
You are the renaissance man of the modern screen, in my view, Pete, because you're a writer of screen content, of kids' books, radio, film, television star, and now I see you've copied me and you've started a podcast.
You just got in before me. I saw an opening. I thought, why aren't comedians getting into podcasting? So I joined every other comedian and jumped in while the water was warm, I guess. It's been something I've been thinking about for a few years, and I've seen some friends who've really loved it. People like Will Anderson and the guys who do the little Dum Dum Club have really built their own audience. It's been really impressive to watch. And I used to do one. I did one a few years ago with a mate, Justin Hamilton, and that was about movies. And then we just our schedules just got a bit nightmarish to try to team up. So I thought if I ever do another one, it's going to have to be by myself with guests, like the way you are now, because then I can just, it's just about organising one guest as opposed to, 3 or 4. So it's been fun. I'm loving putting them together. I've been very hands-on with it. I've learnt a lot.
Well, unlike mine, yours, of course, has gone straight to the top of the charts in your particular little section. My wife told me, Pete's at the top of his game there. But I suppose that's easy if you've got a mirror ball in your studio, like I noticed you have.
Yes, I do. Obviously, there's been quite a few we've done in isolation, where we haven't been able to get into the studio, but we try to record in the studio, and we just chat movies basically. It's called You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, and people will talk about a movie that they haven't seen. Well, they basically watch it just before they come into the studio, and then we chat about it. So it's been great for me because I've watched movies I've loved, like E.T. and The Godfather, with guests who have never seen it before, and other times I'm watching a movie that I've never seen before either. I've watched A Clockwork Orange, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Casablanca. I watch and I hadn't seen before, so it's been a lot of fun.
Well, we better all watch things like Gone with the Wind before they're all changed historically, and we'll be able to watch them in their original form.
It's Yeah, because it's funny because Rove had nominated Gone with the Wind a while ago. Because I just tend to ask people, bump into them, is there a movie you're a bit embarrassed that you haven't seen? And Rove said, "Oh, let's do Gone with the Wind." I haven't seen it either. And I chatted to him a few nights ago, and I said, "Are you still on for Gone with the Wind?" And because there has been a lot of controversy about it recently, and he said, "Yeah, I think we should still do it, but it's good to have this new kind of context and understanding." And they're putting these documentaries out, but before and after you watch the film that you can watch, and it'd be good to have that as part of the discussion when we get around to doing it. Timing is everything.
Was that one of those films that was colorized after the event?
As far as the stock go, I think it is in color. I've never seen it, but I know Rebel Without a Cause was originally shot in black and white, and then they realised they'd already shot some of the film, and they realised that James Dean was going to be a huge movie star, and they basically reshot the scenes they'd already done and added put the money into making it color. So they took out all there's a big fight scene in that, like a knife fight. And there's in the original scene in black and white, there's like 100 kids around, and when it's shot in color, the one that we see, there's like 12 kids because they took the budget from the extras and they put it into making it colour. So, yeah.
Anyway, Pete, you probably have you asked yourself the question, why has Harry asked me to be on this podcast?
Yeah, considering the kind of people you've been having on, base jumpers and risk takers, hence the title, I was wondering where I fit in here. But
tell me, Pete, I recently looked up, I Googled what are people most frightened of, and can you guess what is in the top couple of answers?
I imagine death might be in there.
Death comes in at number 12.
Number 12. Wow, that's 12. That's lower than I thought it would be. I'm gonna, at the risk of stomping on the theatre of this moment, I think I do know it. I think, and it's starting to become clearer why you might be talking to me. It'd be public speaking would be up near the top, because I know Jerry Seinfeld did a great routine that he said that people's greatest fear is public speaking, and their second biggest fear is dying. And he said, so that means people would rather die than do the eulogy at a funeral.
I can completely relate to that. In fact, when I've been doing some corporate speaking and so forth since my little event in Thailand, and the idea of actually doing a speech like at a funeral for a family member or at a wedding is far more frightening than doing that sort of corporate stuff even. I think it's those personal, private events that really put you on the spot and make you sweat.
I completely agree. And whenever I've been asked to do speeches at weddings, I've been, I think, lucky enough not to have to do a eulogy. But I can imagine the pressure. And I've seen people have to write a eulogy, or as I'm watching somebody deliver a eulogy, I feel for them, because how do you, it's more than any gig you could ever possibly do in your life. You want to nail that one, and I love watching speeches at weddings. Because it's usually somebody who quite often it's somebody who doesn't have, it's not part of what they do for a living, and all of a sudden to see the father of the bride up there chuffed and trying to make sure he gets a gag or two away, but trying to be sincere, and whether they nail it or they don't, I just love it either way. I could watch those moments, more than sit in a comedy club, to be honest. I find them really, really human.
Actually, there could be a show in that, best and worst wedding speeches or something.
It could be. We'll pitch it.
There's a raw honesty, isn't there, to those sort of speeches, and especially when it's a bit of a larrikin kind of knockabout footy club bloke who really struggles to find his or her words, but the honesty that's coming through in the speech is really endearing. It's often really beautiful.
Absolutely, the sincerity and the rawness, like you said, and the vulnerability as well. I did a speech for my best mate's wedding, and I was genuinely nervous about it, and that was probably 12 years ago. But people also knew that I was, a comic, and I had a bit of profile then, and I felt genuine pressure, like I've done thousands of shows where people have actually paid money to come and see me, but for some reason I feel more pressure, on a day like that, because you want to do a good job for your mate and his wife and their special day, but also because you kind of sense that people have already commented throughout the day at the church service. Oh, I hear you're doing a speech. I hope you're doing a speech, and you think, oh yeah, I am, and but still, lower your expectations.
Well, especially when the bride's parents have sold tickets to the wedding so that they can recoup the cost.
Yeah, I only found out about that afterwards.
I've listened to you talking about being the class comedian, and when you're at school, and you're careful to qualify that by saying not the class clown, because anyone could be the class clown. Is that when you discovered you had this talent for humour and making people laugh?
Yeah, probably firstly it was just around the family, just being able to make my sisters and my brother and my mum and dad laugh, and then cousins, and that kind of the confidence you take from that you take into the school, whether the classroom or the schoolyard, and yeah, and I borrowed the class comedian line again from Jerry Seinfeld, who I read he took offence at the term class clown. He's a class comedian, and there is a difference. That I would go for jokes. I would absolutely go for jokes. I wasn't the using my armpit to make the fart noises. That's the class clown, and the class comedian does jokes. And I. Around this stage, I was really getting into stand-up comedy. I was watching, The Big Gig on the ABC, and seeing, Glenn Nicholas and Wendy Harmer and Anthony Aykroyd, Richard Stubbs doing. Actually, Stubbs might have been Tonight Live a bit later, but doing stand-up comedy. I was kind of falling in love with that as an art form. When I was 15, I went to the comedy club in Lygon Street in Melbourne, and saw some comedy. Often the local footy and cricket club would have comedy nights where they would have, comedians who you might have seen on the TV, and some that you've never seen before. Like, I know Trevor Marmalade was one that came out, Russell Gilbert, and I was just like, I think this is what I want to do. This is what an amazing way to make a living. And I got up on stage at one of the footy club comedy nights. They had a joke telling competition. And they'd advertised it beforehand, and the prize was, $100 or something. And so I decided I'm going to enter. And I was probably still 15, 16. I was younger than kind of everyone else. Probably shouldn't have been there, to be honest. And everyone got up and just told jokes, that old-fashioned jokes that now you'd probably you'd Google on the internet and But I kind of came up with some original material, and I just, those observations, they weren't very good. I completely forget what they were, but I do remember me saying, "Come on, I'm only 16," as almost whenever something didn't get a laugh, it's like, "Come on, I'm only 16," as an excuse, yes, a security blanket. And I didn't win. A guy called Stuart Farrell won, and Stuart came up to me afterwards and said, "I really admire what you actually try to do. You actually try to do comedy as opposed to just tell jokes." And that was, he was a few years older than me, so that was nice of him to do that, and it kind of encouraged me to an extent, and I just had opportunities in the classroom to get up and, I used to do the odd play that I would write. When I say play, like a series of sketches, really, and they would sometimes get me into trouble because. I would have a go at teachers who some had a thinner skin than others. We had one teacher who allowed me to host when we were doing oral presentations in humanities. She would allow me to host the class. So she would actually sit in my seat. I'd go up and sit at the desk. And Tonight Live was a big thing at the time with Steve Vizard, and I used to love watching that. And I would host the class like I was hosting Tonight Live, and I would introduce the next, act, who basically a student talking about volcanoes or whatever they might be talking about, and it was, I loved it. It was really, that was a pretty cool thing to let me do, I think.
Did you channel Vizard, or were you more like Letterman, or who do you think you were?
Well, I think Vizard channeled Letterman, so probably, it was probably I was channeling Vizard, but I was probably unaware at that stage that he was channeling very heavily Letterman. But I love both of them. I probably discovered Letterman a bit after I discovered Vizard. I knew of Letterman, but maybe not. I didn't realise how closely Tonight Live was based on The Late Show. But I was certainly doing some of those those kind of drum punches and that stuff.
I can picture it. Letterman can be a bit mean sometimes, actually, whereas Steve Vizard, I never saw that side of him on stage, at least.
Yeah, I think they had different styles. I think some of the mannerisms and the segments and stuff they borrowed in the days before the internet, where you'd get called out pretty quickly if you did that. But at the same time, I mean, there's shows like I love The Weekly with Charlie Pickering, but they've taken what the Daily Show do, and that's just become its own genre in a way. And to be generous to Steve and the producers of Tonight Live, the Tonight Show, is an American genre, and they, I think, just took it as okay, we're going to do our own, as you would make our own comedy or drama series or police procedural kind of show. We're going to do a Tonight Show, and the Americans are great at doing it, so we're going to base ours on this one. So you can only borrow so much in stuff like that. It comes down to, when you're doing live television, that Steve had to be as funny as he was and quick as he was to make that show work.
Now, you didn't go on to study law or arts like just about every other Australian comedian, from what I could see. Did you go straight into show business?
Yeah, I considered lying about it for a while. I thought maybe I should just say that I studied law. Is anyone going to look it up? I'm glad I didn't. I didn't really seriously consider that for too long. No, I went travelling. I went travelling to Scandinavia and then to the UK, and went to the Oktoberfest when I was 18, and for about 8 months I was away, just travelling by myself, went hitchhiking around Ireland, and I applied for two things. I applied for, funny enough, I applied for law at Melbourne Uni, and my marks were nowhere near. I was never going to get in. I think I just thought I'll just put that down. But the other one I applied for, which I was keen to do, was professional writing at RMIT in Melbourne, and I didn't get in. So there's a certain irony to that, and I had the pleasure of being invited to speak to their students a few years ago, and they didn't know the history that we had shared. So yeah, it was fine. My first thing was just reassuring them that they're already ahead of me at that age, because I couldn't even get my foot in that classroom.
Well, you could have turned that right around and said that clearly a degree from this university is of no benefit whatsoever, because look where I've gone.
Well, it is the great thing about being creative. You don't need to study. Study can help, and it can it can be really beneficial to some people, and for others it just maybe is a bit of a time waster. Now, if I'm putting a needle in somebody's arms to put them asleep before they have surgery, I want that person to be trained, a trained professional. But if you're going to see comedy, or if you're reading a book, you're not looking up the qualifications of the person before you do that. And there's a lot of learning on the job with what I've done, whether it be stand up or I've just always loved to write, and even presenting on TV and directing was certainly something that I was learning on the job, just observing, on set and talking to people. Yeah, it's not something you need to do in this industry.
No, it sounds like stand-up is not a graduate position, but being an anaesthetist... Actually, maybe I have to say that for all obviously the study at university and the ongoing training is critical, but you do learn a lot on the job. You know, a lot of it is about experience and having good mentors and things. So maybe it's not so different, Pete.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there'd barely be a job in the world, I wouldn't imagine, Harry, that you know, you're not constantly learning on the job, whether it's medicine or law or comedy. I think anyone who's not learning on the job and seeking out new practices and processes and better ways to do things is probably not succeeding in their field.
So we're talking about risk and fear, and I guess the reason I'm really interested in talking to you about is this issue of people mostly being terrified about the idea of standing up, and particularly standing up to try and entertain people, often somewhat ad lib and sometimes presumably quite scripted. But do you remember feeling that fear, and was it ever overwhelming for you? Did it ever almost stop you doing what you wanted to do?
I remember it, and I remember it quite vividly. It never stopped me. It never got close to stopping me. I have to say, I think the fear of getting a real job probably was bigger than actually the fear of standing in front of people. Like I said, I performed at school. I knew what the feeling was like when it went well. I also knew the feeling when it didn't go well. But mostly I'd experienced good, good times. Whether it be making speeches at school or the plays that I did, were generally well received by my alumni. So I'd had good experiences. So I was mainly going into stand-up comedy with some degree of confidence. In fact, the day I did stand-up comedy, it was October 16, 96, at the SB in St Kilda in Melbourne. And the night before, I'd just done a 21st speech, and I hadn't told anyone that I was going to do stand-up comedy the next day. I was like, I want to do this on my own. I don't want load the audience with mates. And I nailed the speech. The speech went great at the 21st, and then I just had a few beers and decided to tell everyone that I was starting my comedy career tomorrow, the next day, and so about 8 of them actually ended up coming down to see my first gig, and which was fine, but it wasn't how I kind of planned it. And the first one went really well. I remember walking to the microphone. I was nervous. I was definitely nervous. Like I was drinking some water backstage, and I've actually seen like my first gig. We actually put it up on a DVD that I put out a few years ago called One Hot Mess, a stand-up special. And we put my first stand-up performance ever on it, and I'm holding this empty plastic bottle of water. Like I was so nervous, I just forgot to put it down. And then when I got on the stage, I didn't know what to do with it, so I'm kind of like this, playing with this plastic bottle. And then I wasn't sure. I went over to get the microphone, and the two questions. To book in at the SB back in '96, there's a guy called Trev who was great. He used to hang, kind of, I think maybe lived there, bit of a stoner, but great guy, looked after people, loved comedy. And Trev would, he asked you two questions. Do you have 5 minutes of material? And do you know how to operate a microphone? And I said, yes and yes. So I got booked in about a month or two in advance. There's a bit of a waiting list. So I walked out, and I was still working out which joke I couldn't to start with. I had a joke about fish and chips, and I had a joke about phone sex. I remember thinking, which one will I start with? Which one will I start with? I was having second thoughts backstage. Do I start with fish and chips, or do I start with phone sex? I was walking out. I get introduced by the late, great Dave Grant. He introduces me, and I go to the microphone, and I go to get the microphone out of the stand, and for some reason I can't pull it out. I cannot get that microphone out of the stand. And I'm I'm pulling it and yanking it. It feels like for 10 seconds, and then I just give up, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to stand at the microphone and I'll deliver it. I'll deliver it. And I was wearing like a suit, not with a tie, but just a suit, because that was my way of separating me for being this kind of performer on stage. I thought I'll wear something different that I wouldn't normally wear, so I wore a suit. And anyway, I start with the fish and chip joke. It ends up going really well, and it's still a joke that other comedians will know and will kind of, it will reference when we're chatting or, if it comes up somehow. And the rest of the routine actually works pretty well. When I watched it back recently, you could see how nervous I am. You could see all the writing in it. There's jokes that have clearly been written and that I've clearly memorized, and now I'm clearly just regurgitating back to you. So it went well enough, and I got off stage and this experience, that adrenaline. And you would know more about this than me. Somebody tried to explain it sometimes. I know with stand up, it's the feeling you get. You don't experience the rush when you're on stage. You experience it as you leave when you're getting off the stage, really. And somebody explained it to me that it's something to do with you got all the pent up kind of like adrenaline, before a gig, and then you do the gig, and then the adrenaline it's a thrill, the adrenaline leaving your body that actually kind of brings you back down to wherever you're supposed to be, whatever your normal heart rate is, wherever you're supposed to be at. That's the rush that kind of comes more so after. You get a bit of relief on stage if it's going well, enjoyment, and if this crowd's hot tonight, or I'm in form, or it feels good. But it's not necessarily the rush. The rush you kind of get more so, I think, when you leave the stage, especially if you're doing like something like I did a Just for Laughs in Montreal. My first ever North American gig was in front of 60 people, and my second one was in front of like 4,000. It was kind of ridiculous, and that was like you really felt the adrenaline even throughout the gig, and then but as I left the stage, of the relief and your body that's coming back to like a state of normalcy was the feeling that kind of gave you the rush, I think.
Yeah, it's all about the biochemistry, Pete, and we could write an article for a medical journal on this, because I think you're right. It's probably a whole flood of endorphins and dopamine and stuff when you're walking off. It's like when I do some exercise, which I try and avoid by and large, but if I do some exercise afterwards, when you're finished, you feel like, oh, I really should lose weight and I should exercise all the time because I feel so fantastic. Well, that's the endorphins kicking in, and that's what makes it all addictive, I think, because it's an opiate, basically, that is an addictive feeling and a beautiful sensation. You're listening to Real Risk, the adventure podcast with Richard Harris.
And do you experience that, like with the cave diving and the stuff that you do? Like, is that something that would, or when does the rush come for you in those moments?
It's a much more low key thing for the cave diving. It's just because I do it partly for relaxation and the rewards that it brings. It's probably the same stuff, the same chemicals, but not quite so vigorous as when you've just been on stage or when you've just been for a run, which provides a much bigger flood of these chemicals. But I was going to say the counter to all this, of course, is when it becomes destructive and you're on stage, for example, and you realise you've forgotten your next joke, say, and there's that big squirt of adrenaline and your testicles disappear into your abdomen and your face goes cold and clammy and you freeze and you feel like death and you want to be dead. Have you or do you still get that occasionally?
Not very often, but it happened. I had one of my worst gigs ever only a couple of years ago. It was 2018. And it was at a strange. I wasn't expecting it to be bad. I was asked to come and do a gig for the Collingwood Football Club for their ex players. So I rushed there from the project, and we were playing the next day. We were playing in a preliminary final against Richmond at the MCG, which we famously went on to win in an amazing match. And there's a lot of excitement going into that match. I was happy to do it. And I was sitting at the back with some more current players, not players that are still playing, but they just recently retired. Dane Swan, Chris Tarrant, Ben Johnson. These names might not mean much to you, Harry. I know AFL's not high on your list, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I'll get you into AFL sooner rather than later. But there's legends in the room. There are absolute legends, and because it's an ex-players function, they're quite a bit older. There are people in their 80s, in their 70s, and I probably don't realise how old the room is until I get on stage. So they're giving me an introduction, a lovely introduction. It's a nice reception. I go up and I hadn't put a lot of thought into the gig. I do a lot of these gigs. You kind of just go, okay, this is the 10 minutes that I'll do. And as I started, I realised that my kind of jokes. This is a couple of years ago. This gig, my jokes about having FOMO or about Uber, doing runners from Ubers, isn't ringing true for any of these people. And I just saw, these, and it was all men basically. There was like one or two women in the room, and it was a good lesson in demographics and knowing your audience. And I probably should have put a little bit more thought into it. I mean, I thought it was a strange response because there almost seemed to be a lack of trying to enjoy the set from a few people, and so I probably did 5 minutes and I wrapped it up, walked to the back of the room and kept walking. Just walked out. I was pretty, on one part, a little embarrassed, but also a little bit angry. I was kind of a little bit like, I have come here, given my time, and I think that you could have been a bit more generous to the idea. But I never completely blame the audience if I have a bad gig. I made that decision years ago that it can't always be about the audience. And I've already admitted to you that I probably didn't put enough thought into the set list. So that was, I guess, why I was maybe a little bit embarrassed, but also, a little bit angry at the not to have a generous room when you're giving up your own time. If you pay to come and see me, then you are entitled to have whatever reaction you like. But if I'm doing it for free, there's a spirit of generosity that is helpful. But I did see the host, Brian Taylor, the next day at the game at the MCG, and he goes, to be honest, mate, they just want to they haven't seen each other for years. They just want to catch up and talk, share old war stories with each other. Given that context, but that was that moment of you feel yourself kind of going, this is a foreign feeling, and you're trying to make decisions along the way. Do I need to what material do I have that might appease these people? They might try to get them back on side, and you are thinking, you're always one or two routines ahead when you're doing stand-up comedy. Like, you try to be in the moment, but you got to kind of be aware where you're going. And when you're not, that's when, all of a sudden you feel your heart rate kind of, spike a little bit when you're like, I don't even know where I'm going to go from here, and that's usually a lack of prep maybe, or just that things have gone off course and you're not sure. Or sometimes you've just decided to do a joke that you usually do later on in the show, and you realise, oh, hang on, there's supposed to be all these callbacks to that joke, so structurally the show's all out of whack now. I'm going to have to, really think, and those shows can be great. Sometimes at the end of tours, when you've got only a handful of shows to go, I will just walk on stage and in the moment decide to do the show in reverse, and know that it's going to kind of push me to come up with a different way of doing the show. That I can't do that joke anymore because that needs to follow this joke, so that's out the window for tonight. And I kind of it's almost a self-sabotage type thing, but you do need to keep the show interesting for yourself. When you don't have that, when you're not a little bit on the edge as far as feeling. I'm not talking about material as such. I'm just talking about like your own performance and the feeling of. If you're too relaxed, I think that's a dangerous thing. And when you start tours, or when I go to the Adelaide Fringe, I love doing the Adelaide Fringe, and always happy to see you there and catch up afterwards for a beer. That's great because it's usually the start of the tour, and it's you're finding new things each night. And then when you get to the back of the tour, it's kind of like you can almost, like at the Adelaide Fringe, I'd arrive backstage about anywhere between an hour and 45 minutes before, and just go through the set list, try to find any new jokes that I can find. By the end of the tour, I could literally walk, get dropped off at the theatre, walk through the backstage entrance, and on stage without my heartbeat changing, and I mean, the show's so run in there, but it's not the best way to do it, like you want to try some new things and to kind of keep yourself, invested.
Well, it's like me going to see the James Taylor concert in Adelaide, and if he'd come out and played all new material, though, Pete, I would have been pretty unhappy. So I guess people have an expectation. People have an expectation of what they want from you, and if they don't get it, then they can be disappointed, I suppose.
Yeah, you have to balance that out. There's no point you trying to keep yourself invested and throw the show around to the detriment of the show. That doesn't work. Every time you step on stage is a chance for you to, win some new fans who you want to come back to the next show. So that's part of it as well.
I reckon those old boys in the Collingwood Footy Club were thinking to themselves, Peter Helliar, you've let yourself down, you've let the club down.
I quickly walked past a table where the more recently retired players were, who I know, and I did say to them as I left, I said, I reckon I might barrack for Richmond tomorrow night. And I left. But what's often funny is when, because gigs like that can be, like when you take comedy out of the comedy rooms and put it in, a corporate function, there's a shift in dynamics and it's not, it's a real pleasure to perform, at the Adelaide Fringe or Melbourne Comedy Festival when, it's you either in a beautiful tent that's, well designed like the Adelaide Fringe, or in a beautiful theatre in Melbourne where, you can control the environment as far as, the music that people are listening to as they enter. But then when you go to a corporate function, you don't know who, like I've spoken to comedians who have gone up after the CEO has just announced redundancies, or warned of redundancies and then introduced a comedian. So, one thing often that happens is if you have a shocker of a corporate, you often will call another comedian just to tell them, just to share, because it can be lonely having a bad gig by yourself. So you got to share and have a laugh. Like Hughesy's a big one, for loving to hear those stories. So if I have a bad gig at a corporate, I will often ring Hughesy, in the car on the way back to the hotel and just say, mate, add this one. I had a shocker. Thankfully, it doesn't happen very often. I do have to, say, but occasionally it does, for different reasons. You certainly are always prepared, I think, for those corporate functions because they are paying a fair whack for your time. So you respectfully, do your due diligence.
Last year at the festival, or earlier this year at the festival, we had a beer after your show, and you kindly invited me backstage to meet some of the other comedians and performers. And I was really struck by the more than collegiate atmosphere between you. It was the way you kind of look after each other and talk to each other, and there doesn't seem to be any rivalry or jealousy, at least superficially. I'm sure there is at some point, but you really share your experiences and nurture each other, because I guess you obviously need a bit of feedback to give you the strength to go on sometimes. Do you find it a pretty good business to be in?
Oh, I love it. And I am, I have always wanted to succeed in a strong comedy scene, not just be a prominent member of it because it's a bit weak, and I love the strength of the comedy scene, and I think we do support each other. There is a brotherhood and a sisterhood in it, and I think because it's such a small club, not many people do stand-up comedy for a living, and then not many people succeed at it. So you even have this really tiny club. So there's an instant respect and admiration, even if the style of comedy you do is not for me. I have you have my respect because you do it. The great thing about stand-up comedians is we all started at exactly the same point, and that is walking to a microphone in front of X amount of people, not knowing if we could do this. There's no nepotism in comedy. You don't get a job because somebody. You stand up. You may have contacts in at a TV network. I got onto Rove Live because I met Rove during doing stand-up comedy. We became mates. We did Channel 31 together. Then he got an offer from Channel 9. And then we went to 10. Once you start meeting people, and sometimes they'll take you under their wing. Sometimes you'll take other people, under your wing. But no, it's a very supportive industry. I think I decided very early on that I would never look over my shoulder and worry about what other people are doing. I genuinely hope for the best for people. I think there's so much amazing talent. I was watching the Last One Laughing on Amazon the other night, and which is Rebel Wilson hosts it, and it's a bunch of comedians, about 10 comedians in a room, and they have to not laugh. So they're trying really hard to make each other laugh. And it's, like a lot of my mates are in there, Dilruk Jai Singh, Nazim Hussain, Sam Simmons, Ann Edmonds, Becky Lucas, Joel Creasy. Like I just, Frank Woodley. I know all these people, and I love all these people. So to watch them was such a delight, and I was kind of weirdly proud of them. I was like, good on you for doing it. Good on you for making it so bloody funny. It's pretty out there and it's pretty risque. Like, it's not for the faint-hearted. They really go hard at, there's nudity and it's full on. But I was like, I so enjoyed, watching them, and very lucky to be part of, such a beautiful scene.
Is it a high-risk industry in terms of personal risk, drugs, alcohol, or partying, all that sort of stuff? Do you have to kind of be a bit careful to not go crazy?
It's certainly around, but to be honest, I haven't seen as much of that as and this is not me being a PR, doing some PR for the comedy scene, but like it's certainly around, and if you want to go down that path, I'm sure you can, but it's never. I've never had anything like pushed onto me or been pressured to do anything. I think comedians, and maybe more so now than even 15, 20 years ago. But there are a lot of comedians who don't drink. Yeah, there are a lot of comedians. More comedians than not don't do drugs. So if you want to, I'm sure you could, and I've certainly been invited to. It's just not something that is of interest of me. Certainly is drinking. There's a bit of that, and I know in the early years, because I was so excited to be doing this, and I was still had my job at Dan Murphy's, but I hadn't kind of turned pro by this stage. But I would go and do the ESPY on a Sunday with people like Rove and Will and the Tripod Boys, and then we would go to a place in North Carlton called Elbow Grease, which is a comedy room at the Nicholson's Hotel, and so that would be the double. We would do the ESPY, grab some dinner, and then roll on to the Elbow Grease. If you're performing or not, you may not even be performing, and then you're just kind of like basically on a pub crawl. But it was, and then after the Elbow Grease, you would go back to the Punters Club in Brunswick Street, and and almost everyone would go there. So you would be, here I am, just minutes into this industry, and you're having a drink with Greg Fleet, or and you're meeting new people who maybe you didn't know, and you're bonding, and you're forming friendships. So that's a pretty addictive. You can become addicted to that, and then it's obviously you're performing a lot in pubs and clubs, so there is a fair bit of drinking involved. So that's more so than even I think drugs. That could be something to look out for.
You're obviously quite diverse in your activities professionally now. You're a live panelist on the project desk. How do you find that kind of work compared to stand-up comedy?
There's a lot more meetings involved. The great thing about stand-up is there's like no meetings. You might have one at the start before I might meet my management and my my tour organizer, producer, Kathleen, and the space, and that's basically just say, are you doing a show? Do you have any idea of what it might be called? Artwork, image as far as photos, because you have to do a photo shoot. So it's just basically, and how big do you want the tour to be? Do you want to do a smaller tour? Do you want to do a bigger tour? And you'll have that meeting over a coffee, and then it's just you need to kind of get on with it and write a show. And but so with the project, there is a lot of there's a lot, 3 or 4 meetings a day. Maybe not 3 or 4. There's probably 2 or 3. And now we're performing without an audience, which has been, I came back from the Adelaide Fringe and was like, okay, there's no more audiences. So that was a concern to begin with. You take an audience away from a comedian, it's a strange one. But I have not minded it. It has not been as bad as I think, and I think the show in many ways is better as a result, because we're not always taking our cues from a studio audience. Sometimes we might move on quicker than we need to because we got to laugh. So we thought, okay, well, that seems like a good time to move on. So now we just we're looking into each other's eyes a bit more and leaning into each other and opening up the show a little bit, I think, as a result. Now, when audiences are allowed to come back, who knows? I'm sure, I'll be the first one to say, yeah, bring them back. But considering I was a bit fearful of it to begin with, I think it's worked quite well.
So you don't feel any additional pressure being live on TV compared to on a stage, or vice versa?
The pressure that comes with being live on TV, Harry, is that, and these days, and this is not a political correctness thing at all, because I believe there's some good things about political correctness, but you have to be really careful about what you say, like more so than ever, because even if you're well-meaning, if you get something wrong, you are opening yourself up to a storm, and it's happened a couple of times. I mean, I won't rehash those times, but where you think you are, not being controversial or saying that something respectful, and it's happened with me personally, and also people on the panel, and it happened just recently, literally a couple of nights ago, not involving me, but a fellow panel member. And I know they did not make that connection in their own head about what they were saying and what some people took as the messaging behind the joke. So it's a really tricky one. It just means you try to be across what all these the connections that people might make about the words that you're putting out there. With that said, if you worry about everything, it's not going to be great TV, and so you got to try to speak from your own heart and your own mind, and but it's certainly the mood is changing. As far as like you really had to be wanting to be controversial, really, to kind of create any kind of storm. Now it can completely blindside you. It could be like, well, that's not. I always consider it. I always try to go, okay, what are they saying, and what did I mean? And sometimes it's the points. And let's say it's not always a personal me involved. Sometimes I see it from other people's perspective as well. And sometimes the points they're making is a bit irrational, a little bit irrational, a little bit over the top. And but sometimes you kind of go, okay, I see your point. I'll learn from this. I'll take this on. Next time, hopefully, I'll handle the situation better.
I just want to finish up, Pete, by talking a little bit about the man behind the facade, the man behind the comedian and the TV guy. And I want to quote a little bit from Wikipedia about your friend Brian Strawn. Wiki says that the comedy is achieved by self-effacing humour, putting Strawn in situations that highlight his weight, lack of fitness and general inability, while his egotistical personality and delusions of grandeur mean he is completely unaware of these weaknesses. Does this in any way reflect yourself? Is this your association with Strawny somehow mirrored the man behind Peter Helliar? I mean, I'm just wondering, do you actually have a shed full of ice axes and scuba gear and maybe a hang glider?
I think what you see is what you get with me. I'm not somebody... With stand-up, obviously, there's a performance element, absolutely. on the project, there's a performance element still, but I'm never saying anything that I don't mean. Sometimes with live TV, you can you might not be expecting to really say anything about it initially, so you haven't put the appropriate amount of thought into it, and then all of a sudden you are speaking on live TV. You become very aware of that. But no, I think what you see is what you get. I don't think there's any hidden. I certainly don't have. I admire people who do what you do, and the adrenaline, junkies, and because it's. As far as being physical, I'm a little bit risk adverse. Skateboarding, this never made sense to me. It just didn't feel right. I admire people who do it. The biggest risk, or it's not even a risk really, but the biggest thing I do that gives me a lovely adrenaline rush is skiing, as snow on mountains. But I'm not even then. I'm not doing the black runs. I maybe done one or two, but not. And probably really slowly went down those runs. But that's something I've rediscovered in the last 8 years or so that I did as a kid, and I literally went from having a lesson at Mount Buller with an Austrian ski instructor, and him literally, and me holding my stocks out, and him kind of like guiding me down, near the magic carpet. We were surrounded by kids, and to the 2 days later skiing down the summit there by myself. So that was kind of fun to kind of go, oh, okay, I can still learn or relearn. I'm not quite the old dog just yet, but as far as I don't know where it comes from, because I don't necessarily have a fear of death. I mean, I prefer not to die, but I have more of a fear of injury than a fear of death. I think injury would hurt more.
In the short term, definitely. I mean, death could be painful.
Yes, true, but you got to live with your injury,
So, are you an outdoorsy family? Do you go camping and that sort of thing, or are you more?
No, we do. We we like to do a bit of both. Yeah, we went. We go camping most years, and we love it. Often up on the Murray, and that's something I kind of missed a little bit of growing up. And then Bridge would often take the kids, and I was working, so I often wouldn't go up. But more recent years, I've just made it a priority to make sure I go up there. And I can sometimes be easily intimidated by things that I don't. Like going back up, getting into skiing, I always found the mountains a bit intimidating. Of the snowboarders, the too cool for school snowboarders, and the European ski instructors, and everyone seemed to know what they were doing. And then I just got into it, and I got the vibe, and I found that everyone's really super supportive up there, and it's a really kind of cool community. Most people are looking out for each other, and I'm really comfortable there now, And getting into skiing, I thought, I should get back into camping and make sure I go on these camping trips. And then I've been doing that, and again, you become really kind of comfortable in the surroundings. And because when I first went back to camping, everyone was like, "Oh, how's he going to go?" And you might leave after a day or two. But I just loved it. My screensaver is me lying in the Murray River, in a wide brimmed hat and have a beer in a stubby holder. It's my happy place. So I do like it. Now, that doesn't mean I necessarily go out and do all the adventure sports that go with it, but I do just love the atmosphere of being outdoors and doing that. And we've always liked taking our kids away on holidays. We actually have a book that I wrote with my wife called Tripping with Kids, coming out very soon, and that kind of tracks a lot of our travels over the years and gives it parents advice when they're traveling with kids, because we want to encourage parents not to put off travelling, because if you put it off for too long, all of a sudden your kids are almost too old, or they're going into their VCE or their final years of school, and so we decided really early on that we were going to travel with our kids, and they're like the most precious memories that I think we have as a family. So we do love the outdoors, but I'm not necessarily the person who jumps on the water skis first, and no base jumping.
No. I'm going to wrap up by saying that to me, you'll always be a risk taker, Pete. When I saw you telling jokes about your wife on stage, I realised that you're a much braver man than me.
There are moments where I do have to, tell Bridge just I'm doing this routine, and she's always very supportive. But sometimes, there are certain routines that I've done. One that you might have been referring to that I was nervous about, broaching with her, but. Tom Gleeson said to me that he had told his wife, you could either let me be completely honest, or you could just be happy to be married to a shit comedian. I think that's a reasonable way of looking at it.
Peter Helliar, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure, Harry.
That's it for this episode of Real Risk. If you're a risk taker or know someone who'd be good for the show, please send me an email on admin@speleopix.com.au. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the podcast. Subscribe, give me a rating, but most importantly, join me for the next one. We'll see you again on Real Risk.